Tony from Victorville.
My name's Tony, and I'm an addict. Good to be in the meeting of Narcotics Anonymous. Can you hear me in the back? You know, they were saying this thing ain't loud enough. I don't know if you guys could crank it up or not. You can't hardly hear in the back. Yeah, be quiet. You heard them. I need a chair. Okay, my name's Tony, and I'm an addict. Good to be in a meeting of Narcotics Anonymous. I had about 6 good stories, and I can't remember any of them. So you know what I wanted to do is we have some people from the fellowship from Japan, from Tokyo, and that's amazing to me. And I would like to welcome the brothers and sisters that we have here today from Tokyo, you know. We are very fortunate to live in the United States and have meetings on a daily basis, and you, just like me, take advantage of that. In 1995, I was at a world convention in Paris, France, and I ran into a guy from Turkey, and he emailed me for a while until I got honest with him, and I guess I hurt his feelings, and he quit emailing me. But at the time, in 1995, there was one meeting a week in Istanbul, is that how you say it? Istanbul, Turkey. One meeting a week, and they had one IP that was translated. In California, we have 3 meetings a day. You know, 3 meetings a day, every night of the week, any city you go into, and it looks like you guys are doing pretty good here, so you need to take advantage of that. Before I get started, I talk a lot of shit. You know, I do. A lot of you had the opportunity to meet me earlier. So I'm going to start with what I ask is a moment of silence. And I ask that everybody prays for me real hard because I need it. Pray that I'm honest. Stick on that one for a few seconds. That I carry a message of Narcotics Anonymous and that I carry a message of hope. And I will say a prayer for all of you, that you could have an open mind, a little bit of patience, a little bit of tolerance, and get some of the hope that you're praying for me to share. So could we have a moment of silence, please? Thank you. I really said the speaker prayer. Please, God, let me be a hit. What's so funny? Works. So what I need to do is relate to everybody prior to getting into my story, because what I've seen happen around here is if I said my drug of choice was heroin, all the speed freaks will leave, right? If I say my drug of choice is speed, all the heroin addicts jam. If I say my drug of choice was marijuana, usually everybody leaves. If you're here for marijuana, God bless you. You don't have to do the shit that I did. Welcome. So what I'm saying is we tend to look at the differences instead of the similarities. So I'm going to try to relate to you in some way because you can't all be Mexican when you grow up. A few of you got a good start, but the rest you can't. So what happened to me as a little baby, my father used to drink beer, right? And I'm a little baby, like in diapers and stuff, and I would go up to the coffee table and pick up his beer and take a sip of his beer. And then eventually, so I believe that's the first drug I ever took. And then at 15 and a half, I got a job at a liquor store. Imagine that. Good place for an addict. And when I started drinking beer at that liquor store, or when I was 15 and a half, Schlitz malt liquor had just come out. Everybody else can relate to that? Around the corner from that beer, they had a wine cabinet. So I started drinking wine, and when I was 16, Annie Green Springs and Strawberry Hill had just come out. Thunderbird wasn't till later. And then behind me, they had the liquor cabinet, and it was like apricot brandy, Southern Comfort, VO, Kamchatka. I tried them all, Tangeray. And then I'm working one night, and a buddy of mine shows up to the liquor store. And he says, "Hey, man, try this." And I say, "Well, what is it?" And he says, they call it marijuana. And when I started smoking marijuana, I don't know how many are familiar with this, but they had kilos, 2.2, coming in from Mexico, and you paid $165 for 2 pounds, 0.2, and you made 29 lids that big. And all of a sudden it started changing, and then they came with these little bags, and they called it Colombian. And then all of a sudden the Colombian turned to the black and blonde Lebanese hash. And then that turned into Thai stick, and then that turned into honey oil, and then that turned into skunk. And then one day I look at the counter, and there's my little buddy, and he says, hey, try this. And I looked at him, and I said, "Well, what is it?" And he says, "They call it speed." And when I started doing speed, we had the cross tops, 10 for $1. And then all of a sudden that changed to these things called black beauties. And then that changed to these things called Christmas trees. And then them changed to pink hearts. And then we started snorting that crank shit that burns the shit out of your nose and your eyes water. And then I look down at the counter, and there's my little buddy, and he says, "Hey, try this." And I said, "Well, what is it?" He says, "They call them downers." And when I started doing downers, we were doing the F40s, 4 for $1. F40s turned into yellow jackets. Yellow jackets turned into rainbows. Blue and purple volume turned into mandrakes coming in from Tijuana. Turned into Quaaludes, and it was cool because you could smoke them. Then one day I look at the counter, and there's my little buddy, and he says, hey, try this. And I said, "Well, what is it?" He said, "They call it LSD." First LSD I ever took was an orange barrel. I was trying to cut it on top of the toilet, and it kept shooting out from under the razor blade. Then all of a sudden they had this little piece of plastic. They called it window pane. Then they had this paper with the dot, and he said that was blotter. Then they had these big brown tablets, and it was called chocolate organic mescaline. Then all of a sudden they came out with this cool shit, and it had pictures of Mickey Mouse on it. Another one, Mr. Natural with the big beard, Then my friend comes in the liquor store one day, and he says, "Hey, try this." And I said, "Well, what is it?" He said, "They call it PCP." And when I started doing PCP, we're getting it from East LA, City of Terrace, and it was mint leaves, and you rolled it up like a cigarette. Went back a month later, and this dude had this brown cigarette, and he said they called it a Sherm. Went back a month later, guy had a baby bottle and shit, dipping cool cigarettes, called them wet daddies, And then I look down at the counter, and there's my buddy, and he says, "Hey, try this." I said, "Well, what is it?" He said they call it heroin. Heroin turned into methadone programs. Believe that shit? Did I get everybody? So you don't have to worry about being Mexican. I told Bob I'd help him out a little bit. Sorry, bro, I didn't do glue, but you might be able to be Mexican. My drug addiction lasted 18 years. I got 18 drug-related arrests. I was in and out of recovery houses. I've been on methadone maintenance. I've been on methadone detoxes. Methadone for me was a get-up so that I could go boosting. I'm going to share a story. I always like to share this one because this is what I did to the people who love me the most. When I was smoking PCP, I smoked it like every day for like 2 weeks, and I started hyperventilating. And they let me go home from work because I didn't feel good. And I went down to this girl's house, and I rolled a couple more joints. I just smoked one, hyperventilating, went down her house, rolled a couple more, smoked one, and got on the bus because we were going to go down my partner's house. On the bus, I started hyperventilating. And I'm telling her, I can't breathe. And then the bus pulls into the mall where they have the big bus stop. And I jumped out of the bus and I start looking at people and I'm telling them, I can't breathe. Do you have any oxygen? Like you carry that shit around, you know? And my arms were getting numb and my arms were getting all tingly. And I'm looking at people, I can't breathe. I need oxygen. And then all of a sudden there's like 20 people and I'm screaming, I can't breathe, and my arms are getting numb and I truly believe that I'm going to die. I can't breathe. And all of a sudden this fire engine pulls up and I walk up to him and I had my Kaiser card and I show him my card. I said, I can't breathe. Can you give me a ride to Kaiser? He said, we can't take you in the ambulance. And I remember telling him, fuck you, I'll walk. And I turned around and started walking away and this ambulance pulled up. And I jumped in this ambulance. Well, if you've ever been in the ambulance, they have them big back windows in the back. They don't open. I can't breathe. I jump out of the ambulance. 3 cops grab me. By this time, I don't even have shoes anymore. You know how we do on PCP, start taking off our clothes and shit. I used to anyway. I'm sure none of you guys did. And the cops get me and they throw me in the back of the cop car and all the windows are rolled up and I'm going to die, right? So I lay down and start trying to kick out the back window because I don't want to die. And they looked at me for a little while and they rolled down the front windows and there was a breeze and I could feel it coming in, and now I'm just laying in the back seat soaking wet. And they came and they got in the car and they started driving away, and I kind of like pushed myself up because I was handcuffed, and I looked over the seat and I tried to tell them that Kaiser was the other way. They took me to the mental unit. They dragged me into the lobby. 3 more guys got me and they're dragging me down the hall. I am screaming as loud as I could, get your effing hands off me. I can't breathe. Let me go. I'm going to die. Get your hands off me. And they're dragging me down the hall. They put me in this little room. They put leather straps, 3 of them across, and then they started giving me medication until I went out. The part I want to share is when I was at that mall with the girl and the cops and the ambulance and all them came, this girl got on the phone and she called my mother. And she said, your son's here, he's flipping out, and the cops just took him away, and I think they took him to Metropolitan. And my mom says, okay, and she jumps in her car and she hauls ass over there. My mom walks into the front office and she says, you have my son here, I want to see him. And the lady looks at her and she says, what's his name? And she tells him, she goes, well, we're just admitting him. You can't see him right now. You have to come back tomorrow. And a couple of months later, my mother shared with me when she was walking from the office to her car in the parking lot, she could hear me screaming from inside of the building. That's what this disease made me do to other people. My mom, come on, nobody loves me more than my mom. And that's the way, I made them feel. Them are the things that I did without caring. And I pray on a daily basis that I never have to live that way again. In 1987, I had just got out of the county jail, and I did 4.5 months for like boosting and stuff. And I was shacking up with the girl because I was working in the visiting. Ever work in visiting? It's either kitchen or visiting. That's the spot. So if you go out again, your kitchen or visiting room. Remember that. And my mother called. I was shacking up with this girl, and my mother called, and she said, the city of Los Angeles called. They want you to call them. And I called them up, and what happened was 2 years prior to that, I had filled out an application for the city of Los Angeles. And the list stays up for 2 years, and they call me. Well, I had just got out of the county jail. I was already getting strung out, but I wasn't strung out enough to where I couldn't quit for one day and go take a physical. And I took a physical, and it was clean. And then I went back and I took about 5 different interviews at different places, and finally they hired me for a job in South Central LA, off of Slauson and Alameda, if you're familiar with that. It was, there you go, brother. Got you right in there, homie. They delivered power poles there, and they hired me, right? So before I start, like, the only thing I'm telling myself, how am I going to keep this job? Because after I took the piss test, I started using again. And here I am getting this job 2 weeks later, and I'm already strung out. And I know I can't keep a job if I'm strung out, so what I do is I tell myself, get back on the methadone program. And I hadn't did that for a long time because I kicked methadone. They dropped me, and I was down to 42 milligrams. I got popped. I went to the county jail, and I didn't sleep for 10 days. And I said, I'm never getting on that shit again. And here I am, an opportunity to have a good job one more time. And I said, you know, I don't have a choice. I need this job. And I got back on the methadone program. I worked in that yard for 2 years. I jumped 2 years. I'm there 2 years. I've been using for 2 years. I weigh 152 pounds now. They told me, Tony, we don't want you going out with the truck drivers because Larry over there don't want to work with you. He says you're loaded and you're going to hurt yourself. He don't want to work with you either. You're always late. He says, so you're going to work in the yard. He says, in the morning you load the trucks. They could leave. If they show up early, get started loading them, finish in the morning. In between, you sweep around here and you kick it here with me. And I said, fine. Well, we start at 7. I never show up till 7:30 because I have to stop in the pueblos, which are projects that are black, to cop my dope before I went to work. So I show up 7:30, half hour late, run to the back real quick and start working real fast like I'm on time and shit, right? And then all the trucks would leave, right? And then I'd go stand by the container, and I'm like loaded on heroin, right? And I'm feeling good and shit. And my head would say, you know what? Some coke would be nice. So I would go in the back. I'm working for the city of Los Angeles. They have copper, you know, all that, just cut pieces, brass, load it in a white company pickup with the city emblem on the side. And then use my driver's license at the junkyard. They're never going to catch me, right? And then I would shoot to the projects, and I would get my coke, and I'd come back to the yard, and I'd sit in the shitter, and I'd slam this coke. And then I'd come out of the shitter, and I'm just shaking. And my head would say, damn, you need some heroin to come down. So I would go in the break room, and I'd borrow $12, shoot to the projects, get the heroin, come back to the shitter, slam the heroin, and come out feeling good. And my head would say, some coke would be nice. I got arrested 2 more times. My supervisor, the one that liked me, that kept me in the yard with him, he opened the door and he looks out at the containers. There I am, 152 pounds, buffed, right? He says, Tony, come here. And I walk over there. He says, come in my office. And I walk in his office. He says, sit down. And I sit down, and he says, Tony. And I said, what, man? He goes, I heard you got arrested. And I said, well, he says, if you go to jail, he says, you're going to lose this job, and it's a good job. And all I wanted to say to him was, fuck, Carlos, lend me $20 and I'll quit. And then he said something about the EAP program, and in the process I went to EAP, and they kind of said, we can't do nothing for you. And I walked out of that building thinking, you know what, I need to go back to jail. I've been running for 2 years. I'm hurting. I can't do this shit. I was tired, man. I wouldn't even steal anymore because I didn't want to go to jail for that again. And I wouldn't even steal. And I mean, my money was gone in 3 days, and I walked out of there. They weren't going to help me. And I said, you know what, I'm going to jail. And a couple of days later, I go to court, right? I've been arrested 18 times. If I got arrested tomorrow and I had to stand in front of the judge, I still would not know what he's talking about. The state of California versus this, 117380. And, you know, I just stand there all cool. I know they say my name. I go to the front and I just stand there. For me, when I'm burned out and I used a lot and I need to go to jail, there's the secret words, how do you plead? And I say, guilty, Your Honor, and I go to jail and I kick it with the homies, lift weights, play handball, eat 3 times a day. So here I am in court that day. He calls up my name. I know that part. I'm standing in front of him. He's reading all this shit off, and I'm just waiting for the magic words. And then he says, come back in 3 weeks. And all I could do was turn around and see who was in the courtroom. Because prior to that, when I would get out of jail, I would go back to Mom and Dad's, because they always used to let me stay there. And I would go back to Mom and Dad's, and when I would get arrested, my mother always knew the day I had to go to court. And she would come into my bedroom and turn on the light, and she'd say, you have to go to court today. She says, get in the shower, I'm going to warm up the car. And then so we'd go to court. One day we're standing in court, and the judge says, come back in 3 weeks. And my mom's sitting in the back, and she actually stands up in the courtroom and raises her hand. And the judge says, yes, ma'am, can I help you? And she says, that's my son. He's living at my house right now. He's stealing from me. He gets loaded every day. Can you please put him in jail? And here I am, 1987, in this courtroom. He says, come back in 3 weeks. And I just turned around and looked, and all I could think was, fuck, I should have brought my mom. She would have got me in that day. I ended up in a detox that I had already been in twice. This was my 3rd time there. And I remember they were giving me methadone to kick. And I would walk around telling everybody, that's it, I'm done, I'm never going to use again. I'd walk up to somebody else, that's it, I'm done, never going to use up again. You know, that's it, I'm done, I'm still on methadone, right? And then one day they bring in this little Mexican guy, there's a lot of them in my story. He's an old guy, right? And he says, come here. And I said, what? He says, come here, man. I said, what? He says, I got the bag. And I'm thinking, we're in detox. I go, we're in detox, man. He says, no, check it out. He says, I deal heroin. He says, I started shooting cocaine. My wife got mad because I don't eat and I'm losing too much weight. So she's putting me in here to get off the cocaine, but she doesn't care if I do heroin, and I got the bag. Took me a while to figure it out, too. And then, you know, I went and laid down, and he went and laid down, and I'm thinking, this dude got the bag. He's older, and the word keister came into mind, you know, and I knew he had some shit. So I made up this story in my head, and I'm going to go jack him home. I'll watch the door for you, or else I'll let him know you got it. You know, give me some. And I'm walking over to his bed, and all of a sudden I have this overwhelming fear, and I stop. And my head says, you're going around here telling all these people in here you're never going to use drugs again. You're going to go ask this guy for a drug that's been kicking your ass for the last 8 years, that made your mom and dad kick you out, that made you lose your job. And I got scared, and instead of going to the guy, I went to my counselor. And I said, I can't leave. And he says, why? He says, because I'm going to get loaded. I know I am. And he says, maybe we can get you in a long-term program. He says, but for now, he says, at 7:30, there's a meeting in the day room, and it's called Narcotics Anonymous. And I said, okay. And so at 7 o'clock, I show up early. I sit all the way in the back, me and my 152 pounds all sucked up and shit, right? And I'm sitting there waiting for everybody to show up. And I remember looking up at the wall, and it said the 12 steps, and I remember everybody saying, oh, work the steps, work the steps, work the... I said, okay, you know. So I read them all, and I said, well, that wasn't hard, you know. It wasn't. And then I looked on the other side, and they had the 12 traditions, and there was words that I could not read that I sure as hell didn't understand, but you know what? I finished them. And then people started showing up, and these two people showed up, and the second guy that shared was this older Mexican guy. And he was a big dude, and he got up, and he looked around the room, and he said, my name's Art, and I'm an addict. And then he says, I was once the baddest motherfucker that walked the streets of Los Angeles. And my head said, how are you, punk, if I am, you know? And this guy started sharing his story, and what he said was he was a Golden Glove boxer, and when he was 18, he joined the service, and he was airborne, and he trained to be a Green Beret, and he fought in Korea. And then he got out of the service, and he was a union organizer for 22 years, lived a life of violence, went to the penitentiary for murder, dealt heroin, whiskey kicked his ass, and he had 5 years clean in the program of Narcotics Anonymous. And I'm sitting there, 152 pounds, and I'm saying, this dude's just like me. Green Beret, penitentiary for murder, life of violence, and here's me stealing from mom and dad. That's about the same, ain't it? So at the end of this meeting, I go up to this guy and I said, hey, you think you can give me your phone number? And he says, sure. And he gave me this little card that had the NA emblem on the back. He put his number. Next day, a couple of days later, they sent this little Mexican guy, see? His name was David. He was from the program. He came to pick me up. He took me to my counselor, and my counselor's writing all this information. And David had said, he says, Tony, you can't do this. You could do this. I said, David, I got 18 arrests. I know how to do this. He says, well, anyway, Thursday night, there's an NA meeting in the parking lot. He says, there's like 100 people, Tony. And he says, you know what? He says, 60 of them are Mexican chicks. I said, cool, you know. So I go see the counselor. He's writing all this information. He says, I want you to go to the NA meeting Thursday. And I'm thinking, I will. 60 Mexican chicks, and I'll be there. Don't worry. He says, get 2 phone numbers and ask somebody to sponsor you. I said, not a problem. The meeting's Thursday night at 8 o'clock. Thursday comes. I'm up at 7 o'clock in the morning ironing my shit like if I'm getting a visit, all right? Whistling. 7:30, I'm in the dorm getting all dressed up, looking in the mirror, looking good, Holmes. You know, I hope she likes you, and you know. And what happened is I come out of a door here, and the meeting's like 40 feet over there, and the parking lot's full of chairs, so I got to come out and then walk over there. And I looked out the window, and they were out there, and I went to the door, and I took 2 steps, and I was petrified. I could not take another step. Back then, I didn't know why. Because of the fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous and working the steps and working the traditions and listening to you people share, what I learned is when I got clean, I didn't know how to be responsible. When I got clean, I didn't know how to communicate. When I got clean, I didn't know how to pay bills. And here I am clean, and I'm supposed to go over there and like talk to you guys. And I could not do that. And all I could do was take another few steps and sit in the chair and watch you people walk back and forth and the people gathering for the meeting. And I looked up at the corner of the building, and there was that big Mexican guy from the H&I panel, and he's like walking towards me. And he starts passing all the people, and he's still coming straight, and I'm thinking he's coming over here. And I sit up straight, and I like fix my shirt, and the guy sits right in front of me, and he looks at me, and he says, how are you doing? I said, I'm doing all right. And then I remembered my counselor. I said, but I need a sponsor. He says, well, how much time you got? I said, I only got 7 days, but I've already worked the steps and the traditions and detox. He looks at me kind of crazy like, and he says, well, I'm kind of busy. I don't think I could do it. And he got up and he walked away. And I thought nothing of that because I knew nothing of the fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous. During the week, we went to other meetings, and I heard a gentleman share that you never have to use drugs again if you attend meetings on a regular basis. I didn't believe it back then. So I've been using for 18 years. These stupid meetings ain't going to keep me clean. Then there was another guy who said you could change the way you walk, the way you talk, the way you think, the way you do things by working the 12 steps and the 12 traditions. And I thought maybe that'll work. And then one day there was a guy, and he stood up in a meeting, and he said, for all you people that are new, and my ears opened up because I was new. He said, in Narcotics Anonymous, we will love you until you learn how to love yourself. And I thought, that's cool, man. Thursday morning, I get up at 7 again. I'm ironing my shit, right? I'm going to be brave this time. I'm going to go out there. It's almost time for the meeting. I look out the window. They're there. Check out the mirror. Looking good, Holmes, you know. Go out the door, take 2 steps, and I'm petrified. I sit down in the chair. This time I'm saying, go over there, punk. What are you afraid of? If they had drugs, you'd be over there, you know. And then all of a sudden I looked up, and here comes that big Mexican guy around the corner. I'm thinking he's coming over here, and he passes the people, and he comes and he sits right in front of me. He says, how you doing? I said, I'm doing all right, but I need a sponsor, man. He says, well, how much time you got? And I'm thinking, well, at 7, 1 week. I said, well, I got 14 days now, but I did the steps and the traditions and detox, And he looked at me kind of crazy, and he shook his head, and he says, you know what? I'm kind of busy right now. I don't think I could do it. And he got up and he walked away. This time I thought, punk-ass motherfucker. And then I remember that guy at the meeting, love you till you could screw him too, Matter of fact, screw all of you. You're full of shit. You talk out of the side of your neck. You're always laughing, having stupid, So during the week, I don't want to go to meetings. Thursday morning, I ain't ironing shit because I ain't going over there, And then the meeting started, and I go sit in my chair, and I'm looking. I go, man, they're weird, I'll take care of my own shit when I get out of here. And then I look up, and there's that big fat Mexican guy. I'm thinking, punk better not come over here, And here he comes, and he's walking closer and closer, and I'm thinking, no way, And by the time he sits down, I'm all worked up, and I said, I need a sponsor. And he goes, whoa. He said, he says, how much time you got? I said, why don't you add it up? I've been asking you for 3 weeks already. True story. He said, I'll pick you up Wednesday. I went in the house looking for little David. David, I got one, Holmes. What do you do now? Knew nothing of the fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous. This man picked me up. He took me out to dinner. He paid for the dinner. We went to his sober living house and watched TV for a little while. And then he says, come on, Tony, we're going to a meeting. We get to a meeting, we pull in the parking lot. I get out of the car, he gets out of the car, he looks over the top of the car and he looks at me. He says, Tony, do you smoke? I'm new. I don't know if smoking's using, right? And I'm like, I say, yeah, I smoke. He says, well, at break, they're going to have a break. He says, you go out and smoke your cigarette break. Someone's going to come in, and they're going to say the meeting's starting. You get back in there. When we get in there, we're going to sit in the back. You need to sit by me. I don't want you walking around. You go out, have your cigarette break, come back, sit by me. Don't be talking when other people are talking. He says, let's go in. And I'm thinking, I said sponsor, not father. I already got a dad, And here I am, 33 years old, sitting by this big old man, can't get up, can't talk. My friends would walk by and they would just wave because they knew I couldn't get up either, And what started happening is we would go to a meeting and they would give out them chip things. I didn't know what they were, right? They give out a guy 60 days, point in the back. He says, I want to thank Art back there. I stay in the sober living. He's a good dude. Thanks, Art. And I'd look at it, Art, and I'd say, what did this fat guy do? We go to a meeting, guy taking 6 months. He says, I wouldn't have got this 6 months. I was going through some heavy duty stuff, and I talked to Art back there, and he gave me some good directions. Thanks, Art. This chip is yours. And I would look over and I think, what did this fat guy do? One day we go to a meeting, the guy took a 3-year cake. He says, I want to thank Art back there. That's my sponsor. And I'm thinking, punk, that's my sponsor. I didn't know you could sponsor 2 people. And one day we're sitting in a meeting and people are thanking Art, and I look towards Art and I said, Art, and he looks at me all crazy like he does, and I said, I want to be like you, man. And he looks at me crazy and I said, not fat, help people. And he told me to work the steps of Narcotics Anonymous. I remember him telling me one time, I called him up, I said, Art, I'm lonely, I'm depressed, I'm all messed up, and I don't know what to do. He says, well, Tony, it sounds like you fell on your face. I said, yeah? He goes, well, at least you're going forward. Get up, dust yourself off, and just keep going. I never understood none of that shit. He says, Tony, you got to have priorities. I know it. Then I'd go look for David. David, what's a priority? What's that word mean, And he'd tell me, and I'd go back to Art, and I'd say, okay, what's a priority? He says, in Narcotics Anonymous, if you want to stay clean, Narcotics Anonymous has to come first. And I said, well, what's that mean? He says, Tony, if you get a girlfriend, and you quit going to meetings and you quit working your program, you're going to end up getting loaded and you're probably going to lose a girlfriend anyway. And I said, that makes sense. He says, if you get a job and you quit going to your meetings and you quit working your program because of this job, you're probably going to get loaded and lose this job. And I said, that makes sense. He says, if you put Narcotics Anonymous first in your life, he says, you could have all things. At 11 months clean, I made the decision to move to Victorville because at 4.5 months clean, they let me go back to work in South Central LA, and I went back to a place where I used for 2 years. And in the morning, at the recovery house, I had 4.5 months. So I was like way up there because there was people with like 3 days. So my nickname was like Spiritual Tony. And people in the recovery house were always in search of me, And they let me go back to work, so I'm going to work. But Spiritual Tony, on the way to work, there would be this one street where there was all these hookers, right? So I would stop and pick up a hooker. And then on the way home, I'd pick up a different one. And then I would show back up at the recovery house and become Spiritual Tony again. And at 11 months clean, I had an opportunity to transfer, and I wanted to quit living that way. And I took the transfer, and I moved to Victorville, and guess what? They had prostitutes up there, too. See, my addiction and the prostitution issue was just like my drugs, from the marijuana to the heroin. It started as a teenager, 16 years old, getting drunk and cruising down to Hollywood and picking up a whore. The worst thing in my inventory is when I was in my early 20s. This is probably the 5 minutes of the tape that the committee listened to. Somebody on that committee has a problem, bro. I was 20 years old. My addiction had progressed to Hollywood, to Long Beach, Pacific Coast Highway, to Anaheim Street, to Garvey Street in El Monte, to what's that street in Bakersfield, Holmes? Union Street in Bakersfield, Blackstone in Fresno. Going anywhere I went, I could find the prostitutes, right? 20 years old, drunk, go to Hollywood, pick up this prostitute, get her in the room, she takes off her clothes, her balls come out. I'm drunk, but I'm thinking in my head, this ain't a chick. But the bottom line is we had sex anyway, okay? And the people that go, ah, they're the ones waiting by my car when I'm leaving. Bro, I need to talk to you. I share this because it's not an issue for me anymore. I share this because there's new people in here with some shit that they think they can't tell somebody. When you get to that point, you remember the Mexican guy and the chick with balls, and you'll be all right, man. You'll be all right. By the grace of God and the fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous, I haven't picked up a prostitute in 9.5 years, okay? So I moved to Victorville. I have enough in me to start a fellowship if there ain't one, right? Get over there and they have meetings. I call the hotline. I go to a meeting. I go to work that day and then I get out early and I go to this address and the meeting's not there. So the next day I get out of work. I say, I'm going to call earlier, and I call the hotline and I go to this meeting, and there's a meeting and it's a big meeting. I got clean in the San Fernando Valley, which is right out of Los Angeles. I go out to Victorville, way out, desert, 100 miles away. And I walk into this meeting and I look around. And I don't say anything to anybody. And I go in the corner and I sit in that corner. I listen to you guys share. The meeting ends. I take off. I go to this little motel where I'm staying at and I call my sponsor. I said, hey Art. He said, what's the matter, Tony? I go, I went to a meeting. He says, that's good. I said, no, it isn't, Art. He says, what's the matter? I said, there ain't nothing but white motherfuckers out there. And Art got real quiet. And he got real serious. And he says, you know what, Tony? He says, if you continue to go to the meetings and you continue to stay clean, he says, the next Mexican guy that walks in there won't have to say that because you'll be there to greet him. 2 weeks later, I'm in that meeting. A black guy walks in. He looks around. He spots the Mexican guy in the corner. He comes and he sits by me and he starts elbowing me. I said, what's the matter, man? He says, dude, he goes, ain't there any black people that come to these meetings? I sat up all straight and looked at him all serious. I said, well, bro, if you continue to come to these meetings... I had that motel. The city had got me the motel for 2 weeks, and I had never had an apartment on my own in life. I was 33 years old. I missed the story about not growing emotionally. You know how they always say you quit growing emotionally? Well, I thought because I was a good booster and that I got mine every day, that I knew how to live emotionally, right? They weren't talking about that shit. They were talking about this incident when I was 33 years old and I'm in the recovery house and the counselors are behind me. I'm an elder now, spiritual elder Tony, right? And the counselors are talking behind me and they're saying, hey bro, no, he's telling the girl counselor, I got to go to Civil Brand, which is a county jail, women's county jail in California, to pick up this Mexican girl that's busted for heroin, and she's coming here. And my head said, county jail, I could relate. Mexican, I could relate. Heroin, I could relate. And then my head says, they must be bringing her for you, Holmes, right? So I go to the commissary and I get envelopes, stamps, cigarettes, and candy bars so I could take care of her when she shows up. 33 years old, right? 4.5 months clean. She shows up. I'd say, oh, you need a stamp? I'd run to the dorm, run back. Here you go. Oh, a cigarette? I got an extra pack. Run to the dorm, run back. Envelope? Yeah, I got one. Run to the, for like 2 weeks I'm doing this. And then I figure it's time, right? And so I go looking for her. And I said, well, I've been talking to you for 2 weeks, and I feel like I'm doing okay taking care of you, and I just want to know if you would go around with me. Do you guys remember go around? It's like the 7th grade, right? I hope you're still not using that line. Asking people to go around. That proved to me that I had not grown emotionally. I went and found David, and I said, you know what, Holmes, I'm going to get loaded and hurt her feelings. David looked at me and said, how are you going to hurt her feelings? She don't even want to go around with you. It's like... So here I am. I moved to Victorville. I'm staying in the motel they rented for me, and like I got to find an apartment. I don't know how to do this stuff. I found a place that I could pay them $40, and they gave me a list, and I could find an apartment. And I started going down this list, and I went to the first one, and it's dirty, and it's ugly. It's a desert. There's no grass. And I said, I'm not going to live here. And I went to the next one, and it was the same way. And I said, I'm not going to live there. I'm clean now. And then I called this guy up and I said, dude, these apartments are all trash. What do you even give me this list for? And he says, no, Tony. He says, there's this nice one over here. Meet me there and I'll show it to you. And I said, fine. And I pull into this parking lot and the guy's waiting for me and he weighs me in to park under this in a carport. And it had like them toolbox right in front of the car. I'm thinking, damn, a toolbox. Check it out. All happy. I never had an apartment on my own. Then he takes me around through the middle. He says, we pay water, gas, cable. And I said, all right. And then we go in the middle, and there's like swimming pool in the middle, and my heart's saying romance. You could bring a lot of chicks home, We go in the living room, the nice-sized living room. We go in the kitchen, and there's this little tiny stove and this little tiny... I'm thinking, how cute. And then we go in the bedroom, and it is big. My head says 3 chicks at a time, dude, Still hasn't happened. I went into the bathroom, and see, in that motel I had my clothes, right? And in my clothes I had this box, right? And on this box it was Scotch tape, and in there, I already knew it was in there, I taped it, right? What was in there was these sets of blue towels, brand new blue towels that I was given for my apartment. And here I am looking at this apartment, and we walk in the bathroom, and the tub's blue, and the sink's blue, and the bathroom's blue, and my head goes, this is where God wants you, Holmes, And I ended up renting that apartment. Somebody said something about hospitals and institutions, and this is my hospitals and institution. I stayed in that apartment for almost 3 years. And what happened to me is I didn't know how to be responsible. I didn't know how to handle all these responsibilities, but I got involved in H&I real early. And what I would do is go share, and I would talk with other addicts. A guy came up to me at the banquet meeting. He met me in the elevator. He's going to get pissed. He met me in the elevator, and I said, you guys going to the banquet? And he says, yeah, we're going to the banquet. And I go, well, I'm going over there too, He said, what's the matter? I said, well, I'm a little bit nervous. And so he hung with me to help me out because he thought I was new and he wanted to hang with me. I was fucking with him because I was a speaker, But you know what? He's going to get blessed for that. Because he gets blessed for what he does, not the results. I get blessed for talking to an addict, not keeping him clean. So here I am in this apartment, right? And like I have all these responsibilities, and I call this a rock story. Let's see if I could do it right. I believe if God gives me something and I take care of it, I get to keep it, right? If God gives me something and I abuse it, it gets taken away like all my shit did, right? And so I moved to Victorville, so my first little rock is this apartment that I get, right? So I got to come home and I got to polish my rock and take care of it. So you know what? I'm going to get this table. I'm going to put a towel on this table and I'm going to polish my rock for a half hour and put it on the table. And you know what? I'm going to put a little lamp on there to keep it warm when I'm gone. And then all of a sudden I have this job. So I come home, I got my first rock, my apartment, I take care of that. I have my second rock and I got to polish that for a half hour and then I put it on my table. Now I have my program, which is going to meetings, working my steps and doing H&I. So that's like 2 rocks. I get home and I got to polish my apartment. I got to polish my job. I got to polish my program, polish my H&I. All of a sudden I start going to college. I get home. I got to polish my fucking apartment, right? I got to polish my damn job. 2 H&Is, I need to get rid of one of them, you know, and then I got to do my college. And I am overwhelmed because I don't know how to do this stuff. And I call Art and I'm saying, you know, there's 2 rocks program. I want to get rid of my H&I commitment. And Art got real quiet and he got real serious. And he says, well, Tony, he says, you know, being a service is an insurance policy for you to stay clean. You know what? 4 years clean, I'm working a step with my sponsee, and I read that in the book, and I thought, shit, my sponsor read the book. And I said, well, I want to give it up, and I want to play golf and relax. I can't handle all this stuff, Art. He says, Tony, you need to pray before you let that go. You need to pray, and you got to find some direction from your higher power. And I started praying. And I started praying more, and I didn't feel nothing. I didn't get no answers, and I started praying more. And then one day I got my answer. And my answer was, God didn't actually call me, but this is what I thought He said, you know. And He said, Tony, He says, because of the life you led, using drugs for 18 years, because of the arrests you have, 18 arrests. He says, because of the changes you have made in your life, because of Narcotics Anonymous and trying to do my will, he says, I need you to go to these hospitals and institutions and tell these guys about the way you live today. And he says, I'm going to tell you what, if you do that for me, I will stay home and polish the rocks for you. In the 12th step, it says, being a service is attending meetings on a regular basis, making yourself available to the newcomer. And the more I wait in this work, the greater my spiritual awakening will be. So you know what? I want that shit. And I enjoy God taking care of my life and not me. What happened is I stayed in that little apartment. I had 2.5 years clean. And I called Art and I told him I wanted to go to Australia. He asked me if I was still going to meetings. I said, yeah, there's a world convention over there, Art. It's the NA World Convention in Australia. He says, really? I said, yes. He says, how much is it going to cost you? I said, I'm thinking it's about $2,500. He goes, well, how much you got, Tony? I said, I saved $3,000, Art. He says, really? I go, yeah. He says, what are your priorities? And I said, well, I don't know. I haven't thought about that. And then he says, you know what, Tony? He says, don't go to Australia. He says, save your money and something good will happen. 6 months later, I'm walking into this gym and this thing says, we sell repos. And you know what? I walked in there. And the guy said, bring me a check stub. And I took him a check stub. See, I got loaded before I had credit. So my credit wasn't all wiped out. You know what I mean? I couldn't even get a card, you know? So I went in there and my credit was good, and the guy says, you could buy a house up to this amount. I said, cool. He said, if you come tomorrow, I'll take you to see one. And I said, not a problem. And I show up and this guy takes me to this little 2-bedroom beat up, tore up garage house. And I looked at him and I said, dude, I'm an addict. I want a new one. So he takes me to the new ones, right? And the new ones are like right next to each other. And you look out the window and all you see is the other guy's house, right? And I live in the desert and there's hills. And in the back of my head, I wanted a view. And every time I would go, this guy would say, well, come and check this one out. It's a little old. And I'd say, no, I want a new one. And I'd go again. He said, well, come and check this one out. I said, no, I want a new one. And finally, after seeing everything, I said, okay, let's go. And we go over and we turn off this paved road and we're on a dirt road and we're going up to the top of this road, and the guy got to the top and he made a U-turn and he pulled into the driveway. I pull behind him. I'm getting out of my car, walking to his Suburban. He opens his door and he reached up on the visor and he pushed this thing and the garage door started opening. All I thought was, I'll take it! Let me see that thing, you know? Cool, you know? You say, well, wait, Tony, you got to see the house first. All right. So I went in the house and I walked into the kitchen and I looked behind this little old man that was sitting at the kitchen table, and it had like a microwave, a dishwasher, a trash compactor, and I'm thinking, man, this is pretty cool. And he takes me in the living room and it has this big steel earth stove for like fires and shit. My head goes right to romance again. We walk through the house. There's 3 bedrooms, a bath and a half. And then he says, Tony, come outside and look at the backyard. And I said, all right. And I remember walking at the backyard. I had 3 years clean. Walking into the backyard, and I'm looking down to see where I'm walking, and I could see grass, and I pick up my eyes and I see flowers, and then I pick up my eyes and there's 2 giant trees crossing in the back, and then I picked up my eyes to the edge of the fence and I could see the whole city of Victorville. And my head said, this is where God wants you. I had $4,000. This guy wanted $10,000. I offered him $7,000. He said, give me a couple of days to think about it. I'm walking out of this guy's house wondering, what the hell did I just do? I offered this guy $3,000 more than I had. And I got home to my little apartment and I called my father. And see, by this time I had 3 years clean, and me and my father had built a relationship. Because when I was still using, my dad got me in the den one day and he says, you know what? He says, I don't know why you kids do what you do, because me and my sister both were shooting dope. He says, we love you and we try to do everything we could for you, and you just keep doing this stuff. He says, you're killing your mother. He says, I love her very much and I can't allow you to do that. He says, you need to leave. Shit, I was only 29. Oh, you moved out early, huh? So see, what would happen is in these 3 years that I had clean, my dad moved to Fresno and it was way far away. How am I doing? All right, thank you. In the 3 years that I had clean, I started building this relationship with my father. And he moved to Fresno, which was about 145 miles away. And I would get out of work on a Friday and I'd shoot down my dad's. I'd get out at 4. I'd get to Fresno like 4 hours. I'd get there about 8 o'clock, but I had this one aunt, my dad's sister, crack up, man. And her house was first, right? So I would stop at her house and bullshit with her and laugh and have fun. And then I would shoot down my dad's. It would be 11, 12 o'clock at night. And my dad would sit up in the living room and wait for me to come home. And then when I would pull up in his driveway, the front porch light would come on and I'm walking up to the door. My father would open the door and he would look at me. And he would open the door and he'd look and he'd say, I'm proud of you. And then he'd open the door and he'd reach out and hug me. And all I could think was, fuck, he's not even in the program. Because we never hugged. My dad finally listened to one of my tapes about 3.5 years ago. And everybody who's called the house in the last 3 months, my dad tell them I'm going to go speak in Hawaii. It's the kind of relationship we have today. I called my dad and I said, Dad, how you doing? He says, all right, mijo, what's up? I said, I seen the house. He says, yeah. I go, Dad, it's nice. It has this thing you push at the garage door. You should see it, Dad, you know? And he says, well, what's the matter, mijo? I said, bring Mom, come and see it. He said, what's the matter? I said, I offered the guy $7,000. I only have $4,000. He said, well, how much you need? I said, I need $3,000. He says, do you like it? I said, Dad, it's nice. Come and see it. He said, no, do you like it? I said, Dad, it's beautiful. You could see the whole city from the backyard. He said, give me your account number. He says, and I'll send you the money. I bought my home in 1992, and I've been there for 10 years. When I had 1 year clean, somebody in Victorville said, Tony, you need to get hobbies. Stealing can't be one of them. So I had to think, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? And then weightlifting. See, I knew how to do that. County jail. So I went to this gym, fancy gym. I walk in there. As soon as I walk in, they're saying, come and sit at my desk. So I already knew something was wrong, right? I don't know how to do bills. I don't know. She's telling me, okay, you can sign up for a year, and all you have to do is sign here on the line, and you pay for 1 year. And I'm thinking, if I'm late, you're going to try to take my blue towels. No way, no way. And I walk out of there, and I go to a meeting, and I share that this lady wanted me to sign a contract, and I didn't know what it meant when I read the bottom, and I didn't know what to do. And the guy says, Tony, he says, you don't even have to go there. He says, there's a junior college right down the street. Why don't you go over there and see if you could sign up there? You guys always said, I do the footwork and I leave the results to God. So I went over there and I filled out an application. 3 weeks later, I'm in this weightlifting class at the college. I'm like 34 years old. I feel like the oldest guy in there, but I don't give a shit because it only cost me $36, right? Teacher calls my name. I'm like, present. See, I knew about how you do it in college. And then I said, you know what, I need to leave early. Can I leave early? And the guy says, go ahead. We're not going to dress out tonight. I haul ass. I get to the Thursday night meeting. I'm a little late, but you know what? I'm still okay. And I'm sitting there and I'm moving back and forth. And somebody looks at me and say, Tony, do you need to share? And I said, yes, I need to share. And I got quiet and I looked around and I said, my name's Tony and I'm an addict. I go to college now. Didn't say shit about weightlifting. I got an A in weightlifting. I took a photography class. I got an A in photography. I took a typing class. I got a C. I called Art, told him he needed to call the college, straighten that shit out. I took math classes, I took business classes, I took computer classes, I took Spanish. They called me in the office 4 years later and they said, Tony, you've been coming to school long enough and you have enough credits to get an AS in general business. And I said, really? And they said, yes. They said, in May we're going to graduate. If you want to get a cap and gown, you're more than welcome to graduate with the class. I come from a family of 6. They're all like, I'm in the middle, they're older, and my little brother's 40 years old. And I come from a family of 6 and nobody ever went to college. And I looked at the guy and he said, well, I think I'm kind of old, why don't you mail it to my house? And I went home and I called Art. Art says, I don't believe you, man. I said, what, Art? He says, I don't believe you. I said, what? He says, every time we talk, you talk to me about your parents. Every time we talk, you say, how are you going to make amends to your parents? He says, and now you have the opportunity and you're not even taking it. He says, you need to graduate for your parents. And I went back and I got a cap and gown. It was May of 1995, and we were at this place called Maverick Stadium, and I remember walking across the podium, and I walked down on the other side, and I looked up in the stadium, and my dad was sitting in the corner seat, and he was crying. And my mother was sitting right next to him, and she was crying. And my dad's 2 sisters drove all the way from Fresno, and they're like right next to them, and they're crying. My little brother, his wife, and 3 of my nephews and nieces, they're crying. And the girl I was dating, like the whole fucking row's crying, you know. And I looked up there and I thought, shit, I didn't even steal the TV or nothing, you know. And I got out of there and I walked to the parking lot and I walked up to my father and his eyes were still red. And he looked at me and he said, I was proud of you. And I looked in his eyes and I knew he was. I had 6 years clean, not 6 months. They still don't trust me yet, you know? I walked up to her, my mom, and her eyes were all red, and I could see in her eyes she was proud of me. This program has given me, you guys, I'm in here in Hawaii. Did I say thank you? I need to thank the Hawaiian region for asking me to come out and share. I love you, man. Thank you. I've had opportunities, like I was at the World Convention in Chicago in 1993, sitting in Wrigley Field watching a baseball game thinking, what the hell am I doing here? Paris, France, 1995, Narcotics Anonymous World Convention, top of the Eiffel Tower with my 13-year-old niece. My sister let me take her, my girlfriend and her daughter looking up, checking out like this. Thinking, what the hell am I doing here? Yellowstone National Park, standing in front of Old Faithful, shooting full blast. My 14-year-old nephew and godson standing next to me. We're the only two Mexicans out of 300 people with baggy pants and our hands in our pocket, you know? Old Faithful shooting up full blast. I turned to him and I said, what do you think, mijo? And he said, this is pretty cool, Theo. This is pretty cool. Because I got arrested in different towns, I never picked up a felony, and like for the last 3 years, I've been teaching a youth club. I'm a certified NRA coach, believe it or not, 22 rifle. And I signed up to help this guy run this youth club, and he quit in 2 months, and I was left with the bag, and I managed to run that club for 3 years. I used to get the boys, we used to take them to tournaments, and I wouldn't let one of them sleep down my house. It had to be 3 of them. And there used to be this little kid with orange hair. And he used to sit shotgun when we're riding to a tournament, and he'd look over at me. He said, man, don't you think that's a good thing how the United States took Texas, Arizona, and California away from the Mexicans? He goes, and I kind of look at him, he goes, they probably would have fucked it all up, man. And I'm looking at him, and I said, yeah, I guess you're right. But see, he didn't look at me like that. He looked at me as his coach. He looked at me as a person that cares. And that was funny, man. Last March, was it March? March the 9th, we had a safety meeting at work, and I received a pin for 15 years with the City of Los Angeles Department of Water and Power. There's 4 things that you guys told me to do when I was brand new, and you know what? They haven't changed. My clean date is April 18th, 1989, and the 18th of this month I had 13 and a half years clean. There was 4 things, and the way I look at it is 25%, 50%, 75%, 100%. The first thing you said was go to meetings on a regular basis. I went to meetings every day for 2 years because I didn't know what else to do. I didn't know what else to do. And I wanted to use every day, and when I go to the meeting, you guys give me the strength not to use one more time. So they said, go to meetings. That's 25%, Tony. I said, fine. So you need to get a sponsor. I got Art right away. That's a big, long story, and I don't have the time to get into it, but I buried my sponsor almost 5 years ago today. And I went into a depression for almost 2 years. Today I have a new sponsor, Gil L. from Colorado. And he loves me to death. One time we were talking about obsessions, because it's that new book in the second step, Write About an Obsession. And I said, well, how about all my journaling and keeping track of my money? He says, no, Tony, that's healthy. I said, well, how about masturbation? He goes, that's a good one. And that's all he said. So I go to meetings and I have a sponsor. See, he's going to be by my car too. Dude, I need to talk to you. I go to meetings, I have a sponsor, and they said work the steps. I work the steps with Art, and this is something, that I tell everybody I work steps with. The growth comes when you work your steps with the sponsee. The growth comes when you work the steps again with the sponsee. I always say that in my area. Someone with 5 years clean, oh, I sponsored this guy and I worked the steps and I learned so much. And I'm thinking, I've been saying that for years, you know. The growth comes when you work the steps with the sponsees. I have 10 sponsees that I've taken all the way through all the steps. I've worked the steps in state facilities. I have a step study at my house. It's been going on for 2 years. We did the basic text. We did the it works, how and why. It's time. Are you fucking with that thing or what? We have, anyway, 25% go to meetings. Go to meetings, get a sponsor, 50%. Go to meetings, get a sponsor, work the steps, 75%. Go to meetings, get a sponsor, work the steps, and be of service. I got in service at 4.5 months clean, and I have been in service every day that I have been in the fellowship of Narcotics Anonymous. Today, I work 100% of a program for me. When you leave here tonight, ask yourself, what percentage of a program do you work? Thanks for having me.